Hello, my name is Dr. Patty Ann Ford and welcome to my YouTube. I am here to talk to you today about your relationship with food and how that can impact your kiddo. Or does it? Or does it even have a relationship? And I really want to focus today on how you can nurture your kids' relationship with food despite your relationship. So your relationship with food is important. How you parent your kiddos' relationships with food is definitely important, but they're both different. So so my name is Patty Ann Ford. I am a registered dietitian. I have a PhD in preventive medicine, and I coach clients into identifying their unhealthy habits of thinking and shifting slightly to habits of thinking that are going to serve them in their health, in their relationships, and in their business. And so I love working with people. I love the topics of health, and I love the saying that there's no such thing as a good food or bad food. And so if that is just a new concept for you, stick around. I have other videos and just get to know me a little bit and see if you are someone that you would like to like or subscribe to my channel. So thank you for being here. My focus today is to focus on kiddos' relationship with food and how can you nurture that. I have two little boys and they are totally dependent upon me and my partner. They do not get their own food. They're starting to learn how to make their food, but they're responsible for eating it. And I have a soon-to-be 9-year-old. He is starting to use words that have shown me he is starting to navigate what his body looks like, what his friends' bodies look like, and how food can interact with that. And it was just a couple weeks ago, I took him and his friend out for a day, and his friend started asking me, how many steps do you have on your watch today? And he actually asked, what food do you think people eat that makes them fat, Miss Patty? And it was very interesting because he had the language to describe what he was thinking, but he also was thinking that. And he had the courage enough to ask such a question, right? Where my son hasn't navigated that all. He hasn't brought that question to my attention. And I think when we heard the question, my son started joking around about cheeseburgers and extra carrots. Like you could tell my son's navigation of that was going to be different than his friends. And neither is wrong or right, but it started to kind of question what is happening in his home where he's labeling bodies as fat or thin, where if that word feels triggering, I could easily say what is in his language where he's starting to recognize that bodies are larger or smaller than others. But now he's starting to connect. There's an association between what you eat and how your body shows up in the world. So it leads me to think there is conversation in his home about bodies and food and their relationship. So taking a step back, your relationship with food as a parent, I'm assuming if you're watching this and you're 3 minutes in, you're a parent and you have kiddos at home and they're young enough where you're still having an influence on how they show up in terms of their health. Your language that you use about your body, you're modeling for them. You're modeling for them in such a way where if you love your body, you're showing up for it, you use kind words with it, you support your body, meaning maybe you spend time with it in exercise, you spend time with it in sleep, and you pay attention to it in a very appropriate way. So kids start to do that themselves. They hold their body how it feels. There's not too much shame around it. If their belly is sticking out, they don't really notice it. I think of a toddler. When a toddler stands, their shoulders are back, they have the best posture, and their bellies are usually very large. They're growing, and they're comfortable. That's how they stand. And at some point along the way, if they learn this, they may or may not, someone will say, don't let your belly stick out. And so now all of a sudden, they're aware of how their belly is. And then if it gets further, they start to understand that, I need to change my body in order to show up in the world appropriately. So if this is just a new topic of conversation, this is like I've never articulated this before, ask yourself how you talk about your body. Now, as a woman, sometimes women will stand in the mirror and look at themselves and critique their body, or they'll look at a picture and they'll critique their body, and they do it out loud where a young child, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, hears it And then they start to understand, oh, well, my mom hates her body, or my mom, maybe hates is a strong word. My mom doesn't like her body. My mom doesn't want to show other people that picture because of her interpretation of how she looks. And so then they start to think, well, maybe is that what I need to do? Or one step further, you have started to make comments about your child's body to them. Maybe your child's body is larger, and so you have started to say, well, we need to change your body for your health, but the child has the potential to interpret that as I'm not okay in my current body. And it's a very interesting dance, because I do believe in health. I do believe that how your body is formed can have the potential to impact health. But a thin body and a larger body, or kind of a normative, Eurocentric body ideal that we have, both can experience disease, both can experience health. And so I am coming from a stance that weight loss or weight gain doesn't always dictate health outcomes. It can. But how a child will interpret their evaluation of their body and how it shows up in the world can have lasting long-term impacts. And they're going to typically model what you're doing. And so when I had this conversation with my friend's son, it was just, well, what do you mean a fat body? I wanted to understand what his interpretation of fat was, because everybody interprets that word differently. Everybody interprets that word subjectively. There is an objective measure in science, in medicine, called BMI, or waist circumference, or body fat, and we can measure those things. But that actually is a debatable measurement as well. How that was formed, how that's identified, but that's what is used in medicine currently. And so as kids have access, I'm on a phone, I have access to the world in my palm. As they start to grow older and they start to understand these measures, if that's what's taught in their school or if that's what's taught in their home, then they start to numerically identify their body. But the most important is how the guardian, or how whoever's home is modeling their interpretation of their body. So the first takeaway is ask yourself, how I can impact and influence my kiddos is, how am I talking about my body? How am I showing up for me? And if you have a damaged relationship or just a difficult relationship with your body, that's okay. I'm not here to say shame on you. That's your journey. That's your pain. Be aware of it in front of a kid. It is really, really, really important to kind of identify first, what has my language been around my kid about my body, and can I just separate it? Can I keep my thoughts, my relationship with my body separate from how I can parent my kid? And sometimes it's really hard and you can't. And if you're a parent and you're thinking about how you were exposed to body language, it's not to judge or blame or point the finger, but just to cause awareness, because most of the time that's how you were subconsciously modeled your interpretation of your body. 2, what is your language around food around your kids? Are you labeling food as good or bad? You can easily remove good or bad, remove the morality, and just talk about food as nutritious. What kind of nutrients are in the Oreos? What kind of nutrients is in the quinoa or the wheat grain or whatever you're using at home, the pasta? And you can identify there are definitely different nutrients in those two foods. You're not a bad person for eating the Oreos. You're not a good person for eating the quinoa. The difference can be you can have both things and still have health. The consistent exposure to Oreos can lead to certain outcomes. The consistent exposure to quinoa or whole grain pasta, that can lead to certain outcomes. So they both have outcomes, but what is happening consistently in the home? So as a parent, between birth and 15, kind of maybe 13, 14, 15, you are given the task to provide food, to provide enough food in an appropriate manner. Now, food, water, shelter, all these things are basics for survival. So the next step up is it helping you feel safe? Is it helping you feel comfortable? Do you feel nourished enough? And that's the next layer. So the first layer is access to food is definitely in health inequity that we have in our culture. It's definitely an issue. I want to go the one step further is, are you giving access of all foods to your kiddos? And this was a fun conversation I had with some parents last weekend, where my kids sometimes will choose a carrot. I'm not hopping on a high horse, but I will say I've given access to both Oreos and carrots, and my kids get to choose. Now, it's not all the time Oreos, but sometimes they will choose the Oreo and sometimes they will choose the carrot because they know they have access to the Oreo when they want to. So it kind of decreases this ideology or this I want the Oreo all the time, because they know they can have access to it. So it makes it less appealing. Where if you're in a household where there's good or bad or junk food, the junk food becomes so rare and so appealing. If you have a personality that they tend to want to always be in the fun, which is a lot of kiddos, that can sometimes be when they do have access to it, they don't know how to stop. And sometimes then that can lead to these developments or diagnosis that, oh, well, my kid is addicted to sugar. Well, if you don't have access to something and then you have access to it, it's like free reign and all you want to do. And so making sure that you're keeping food as a priority in life, but it doesn't become this black or white where they never have access to these things. Now, again, I'm not here to debate what's best or what's wrong. Just having a conversation of how are you labeling your food? How are you talking about food? How are you talking about your body? So 2 things. Third, how is the structure around food? If they have access to food all of the time, what can happen is when they're experiencing an emotion like boredom or sadness, and sometimes kids don't have the language for what they're experiencing, coping with food, if they have access to all the time, it becomes so easy to do. And then the neurological components is when you have high fat, high sugar items, that feels so good. And there's a rush of dopamine. There is a physiological reaction in most normative brains that feels really, really good to eat. Not all brains are set up that way in neurodiversity. Sometimes food is very painful and it feels eating is annoying. I've had kiddos where eating is the last thing they want to do. They eat to feel not hungry and then they move on. Eating is not something that they enjoy in their life. And that's okay. That's a different conversation. But typically we have a dopamine response when it comes to food. And so where is the structure with food? Are they given certain structure where we do want to have a plate at a meal that has your starches, that has your fruits, that has your veggies, that has a protein source? And our kids starting to understand that to make a meal nourishing, it has all of those things in appropriate amounts at appropriate times. Because typically kids are hungry and then they're full, and then they're hungry and then they're full, and they're hungry and then they're full. Then they go to bed, and ideally they're waking up with a sense of hunger to kind of refresh the day. If they have access to foods all the time after dinner, they eat, or snack, they might not be hungry when they wake up, and then the whole kind of normative hunger cues disappears. So having some structure around access to food, structure around meal timing, and saying, right now we're gonna have our dinner. You can have dessert after you eat foods that are gonna fuel your body in this way. Keeping it really objective, keeping it really safe, and having some limits, and having the ability to have this empowered no, and not a no out of shame or a no out of guilt or out of no of like legalistic judgment, but out of no, we're going to nourish our body in this way as a family. And then you can choose a dessert after you finish your plate that has your chicken and your carrots and your pasta, because outside kids, they're very impulsive. And so they do need some structure around access to things that feels good. And a structure in such a way where, again, it's not all or nothing, because sometimes it is really fun to have popsicles for breakfast. Sometimes it is fun to bring in the impulsive decisions that are fun. But every now and then, what are you consistently providing structure in regards to meals? All right, so 3 things. What is your conversation around your body And how are your kids finding that conversation to be? What is your conversation around food, and how are you expressing that with your kids? Is it good or bad? Let's remove the morality. And then, is there structure around food in an appropriate way? If there is no structure and there's chaos and there's freedom, that's going to lead to other things. Or is there so much structure where there's no play, there's no spontaneity? That can lead to lack of joy as well. If you have any questions or if this was beneficial, please follow for more. I would love to build a community here and to connect with individuals that just really want to learn about their health, their kiddos' health, and how they can benefit their habits of thinking towards more optimal health. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.